So today I'm going to be taking a look at my first watch from the watch brand Haim. They've been around for, I believe, about 3 years now, and this is one of their most recent models. It is a cool mecha quartz chronograph, and let's take a closer look. As a note for anyone interested, I am starting a little Patreon thing, so that'll be linked down below. I'm not charging you money just to take it. I am going to be doing giveaways with all the proceeds, so hope to see you there and chat to you soon. So we have a diameter of 38 millimeters, lug to lug of 44.6, height of 11, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications here, we're going to have the Seiko VK64 Mecha Quartz movement beating away in here. We have 50 meters of stated water resistance with a regular push-pull crown. We also have a sapphire crystal, which is very flat and quotes to have 5 layers of anti-reflective coating. I don't know if that's on the outside or the inside, but I'm assuming it's on the inside. We also have a steel case, no lume used anywhere on the dial, which I personally prefer for this styling. And last but not least, the watch retails for $450 directly from Haim. Now, starting off with the dial here, and I do think this is probably the most interesting part about this watch. They did this very subtle brushing in multiple sections, which really bring the watch to life at certain angles. Depending on kind of low lighting and off angles, it goes this almost super black, very dark navy tone. And then as you move it, these blue tones pop out, become a lot brighter, a lot more lively. And it is just beautiful to see. The brushing on the outside here, hours track, I guess you can say, is done in a circular pattern, whereas the middle portion is done in a vertical one. So they kind of switch off between blue tones. When one is light, one is dark. When one is playing around, one is more static. And it really just has a lot of life and depth as you move it around. And it is just a beautiful dial to look at, really. Looking a little bit more generally, of course, we do have a sectioned out dial here, the middle portion with these sub-seconds which are recessed, which is a very nice touch. Then we have this metal ring separating to the hours track. Of course, Brigade numerals all around, and they are actually applied on the dial, which gives them a nice little bit of depth, three-dimensionality, and they do just play with the light beautifully. Then we have a little bit of a railroad seconds track on the very outboard, and then a really small tachymeter scale on the very edge kind of rehaut area, which is really nice because it declutters the main base dial. It doesn't make it look too sporty, look too intense, but adds a nice little color on the edge and also just leads your eye down and gives the watch a little bit of depth that it wouldn't have otherwise had. The handset is very nice and classy. I believe this is kind of just a long sword style. If it's not, I'll correct it down below. But they have a facet on either side, a little bit on the thin side, and just look right and proportional for this type of watch. I will say at some points they are a little bit blendy into the watch. It could be a little hard to read for some maybe, but I have no trouble with it, and you can catch it at the right light as soon as you angle it to be able to read the time very nicely. The interesting part about this movement is there is no running seconds on this watch. If you wanted running seconds, you would have to start the chronograph, and that would act as your running seconds. I do like it here because at the end of the day, it does clean up the watch a lot. It just gives it a 2-register feel, makes it a little more vintage feeling, and also just declutters it, which is a nice touch. I will give Haim massive props on the numerals here and just the metal ring that's applied as well. It has a lot of light play to it. They aren't flat, they have a little bit of three-dimensionality to it, they have a roundedness to it, so it really grabs the light no matter which angle you're looking at. It really pops against the brushed dial. It looks classy, it looks premium, it looks more expensive than the price point would suggest it does, and really it's something that really grabs the eye beautifully. We also have a little bit of metal around these registers here. It is a little bit more sunken down compared to the outer metal ring, but it catches the light just as well, adds a little bit of visual interest, but it's also not overpowering. It's something you could almost not notice at first glance, but it really pops out the more you move it around and play with the watch. So taking a look in natural light, we can see the blue just has a beautiful depth no matter where you put it. In shaded light, it's a little darker. It still does change depending on extreme angles with the hours track and the inner dial, but it's a little bit more static, a darker blue. Still beautiful, still get little hints of that lighter blue popping out, but it's just not as dramatic. In direct light, though, the watch really shines. It goes from this vibrant light blue to this dark, saturated blue. It just has a lot of life, a lot of changingness to it, and this is one of the few watches that looks basically just as good outside as it does inside, which is very hard to do nonetheless for this price point. And then just lovely on the wrist. You can get some areas in the shade where those lighter blues do pop out a little bit more, but it tends to be a little bit darker. It still just looks great. The indices shine really nice. They pop out. it just is, I think, a well-executed watch with well-executed design elements. And there we go, a little shot of the sun. It just really pops out in direct light because that brushing really comes to the forefront, and it is a beautifully done brushing. So taking a look at the watch up close, we can see the detail that starts coming to life. One, the brushing of the dial is done pretty well. Again, that vertical brushing down in the middle section, the circular brushing along the outboard, and something that was kind of hard to notice when we weren't zoomed in is the vertical brushing resumes out here in the minutes track, which is a nice touch, and it helps that the minutes track and inner portion of the watch here kind of change at the exact same angles. So it really just does partition the watch out into two different blue tones that it really just gives it a premium feel. And when we're really close down here, you can just see how beautifully round all those markers are. I really prefer this type of styling because it really grabs the light no matter what angle you have it at. Whereas when you have a one-dimensional kind of flat-topped marker, it only shines when you hit it at the right angle, and it's usually an angle where you're not directly looking at it. So typically you look at it on your wrist and it's almost black and slightly illegible, and then you turn it and it looks beautiful. But this is the best of both worlds. You get it kind of always on effect that is highly legible and beautiful. A nice touch too is this seconds hand for the chronograph counter is also rounded, has beautiful shape to it, fully highly polished. Of course, the hands themselves aren't the best in terms of QC. There are little specks here, a little bit of dust, a little bit of roughness. So that is something that they can definitely tighten up on a little bit, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. Looking into the registers here, we can see we have concentric circling done two ways, one a tighter weave than the next, and it is just an interesting look. I'm glad that they mixed up from the brushing of the dial, added another little bit of finishing, and again, you have the beautiful stepping from the topmost dial to the first part of the subseconds, or first part of the register rather, and then the last part of the register. There is just so much depth built into this watch, and it really does benefit from that. I also like that they kept the text very minimal here. We just have Haim, which is the brand, at the 12, and then at 6 we have Chicago, Illinois, where they are based. Nothing else on the dial, no need to say it's a Seiko movement, no need to say water resistance or anything like that. All the other important stuff is on the back. So we have a relatively decluttered dial, and all the elements are really just on full display to be beautiful at the end of the day. We do have little QC issues here and there. We have like that little speck on the ring separating the inner dial from the hours track. Some of the, of course, the hands aren't perfect. We have little specks here and there. The markers themselves, I think, are actually really well finished overall. So that's something they did a really good job on. Tiny little specks on the 6 there, however. So it is just one of those things where I think they can tighten up the QC slightly, but even then, honestly, from wrist view, it looks almost perfect. So I think most of it is forgivable. So moving on to the case of this watch, and maybe not as impactful as the dial, it's also super interesting. They kind of state on their website that the crown and case styling is supposed to be like a modified Corne de Vache styling, and you can kind of get that out of it. You see the lugs very much, where you have a little bit of separation from the case, almost like it's welded on. They have a little bit of that rounded Corne de Vache shape about them, but they're not as teardrop-esque, which honestly I prefer. Sometimes that rounded lug styling can be just a little bit too much for some. You have a very round circular mid case here, very bulbous, but we do also just have a nice mix of finishing. We of course have a little bit of a chamfer here along the lugs. The bezel itself has a polished surface there that's completely flat and vertical. Then it has more of a sloping part that's brushed, and then another part that's still sloped, but then more close to the crystal itself that's polished. So there is a lot of like light play you get with the watch. You see there's a lot of differences in finishing. There is from the top side mainly polish going on. There aren't really any brushed surfaces until you get to the side, which I like. The side isn't something you look at the most, so it's nice to have it as a more quote-unquote like rough and tumble finish, and no complaints there. The watch also has these rectangular pushers, which is just different. It's not something you see very often, and I think it probably fits with the theme of being a little bit more of a vintage leaning chronograph. The feel is pretty much the same as any other mecha quartz movement, but I will say there is really no gumminess or stickiness or just mushiness when you're using these pushers. It actually is a very good actuation. So I don't know if that's due to the movement or due to Haim or due to a little bit of both, but either way, very nice. And then just a very simple stainless steel case back, brushing, a little bit of text on the outside, nothing special there. And I do just want to talk about this strap for a second. This is a custom-made strap from Deluxe for Haim specifically, Haim custom signed buckle, which is actually really well done. And of course you can see down here Deluxe for Haim. But I really love the strap, not only because Deluxe makes some pretty good straps, but one, quick release, which is cool, but two, they've just paired the strap perfectly with this watch. This darker blue tone for the base strap with this very accented light blue stitching, it just works awesomely. This is one of the very few instances of a watch almost coming on a perfect strap already. I'd be very happy never changing the strap on this watch, and am confident it looks good and it'll always look good, and it can be used in a variety of situations. So well done to Haim for going the extra mile and not putting a subpar strap on this watch. So moving on to how this watch wears, earlier I was wearing this other fun micro brand. This is Solab's Layer 2. And there we have the watch sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist. And I think you can tell not only are the proportions pretty nice, really short lug to lug, it also doesn't wear too thickly on wrist. I do think it could be a little bit thinner, but it's not a big deal. It mainly just feels very nice on wrist. It looks good, it pops off wrist, the metal applied elements are executed amazingly, the blue tone really pops out. I do think it was also a good idea to go with a blue strap because it kind of blends in with the dial a little bit and lets the other accent parts of the watch shine a little bit more, lets the finishing, the change of blue tones, everything just pop because the strap isn't distracting away from that. The crown is pretty well proportioned, it doesn't dig into my wrist, same goes for the pushers. Everything is pretty well thought out and well done here, especially even with the fact that you have that rehaut area being the tachometer scale. It kind of leads your eye down and helping the watch not feel as thick because it almost becomes a little bit part of that watch. That depth isn't wasted, it's not unused, it is still part of the watch and part of the experience and part of what you're looking at. Looking at it from the side view, we can see it sits pretty well into the wrist. It's not a thin watch by any means, but it's not overly thick or egregiously thick or anything like that. It still does wear pretty well, and at no point did I wear this and think it looks out of place or it doesn't fit nicely or it wouldn't fit under a dress cuff or anything like that. Moving on to some other straps, and I think this is a really fun combo, the cork strap by Theo and Harris. This lighter brown tan tone really just pops against the blue. The little bits of blackish from the natural cork just, I think, look really cool and add a texture to the watch. It is a fun combo. Again, I do think that Haim pretty much hit it out of the park with the original strap pairing, but this is a fun way to mix it up. Definitely helps the blue pop in a different way than the strap does, where that just more blends away. So really cool combo, and thankfully a watch that is pretty versatile. Next we have a dress chronograph on a one-piece strap. This is by Crown and Buckle. I believe it's like their Oxford strap. I'll have it linked down below either way. Looks really awesome, introduces a new tone of blue that really isn't found in the watch, but I think complements perfectly with the other tones that are already there, and it's just a fun piece. There we have it on wrist. Looks really good in my opinion. Pretty fun, adds a little bit of texture, casualizes the watch for sure, and kind of makes the watch pop a little bit. It secretly blends in with the registers a little bit better than it does the dial, so I think it just is a pretty fun combo. And then of course the White Archer silicone strap really plays off the applied indices, almost makes that metal seem a little whitish and plays off of that. Very comfortable, pretty fun, and let's get on wrist. Plants the watch amazingly, just is an interesting combo all around, I think. And this is really just a good looking watch. It takes well to most straps. It has a casual but dressy feel about it. It can definitely be worn in multiple situations, and it does really just have a beautiful dial there. Lots of light play, lots of color changingness, and really just well done. So pros and cons of this watch, and one of the biggest pros of course is just gonna be the size. It's nice to see that it's under 40 millimeters. It's in a nice sweet spot. We don't see a lot of sub 40 millimeter chronographs. It's starting to happen a little bit more, especially since the rise of Dan Henry, but it's nice to see other brands taking up that mantle as well. It fits pretty well, the case is constructed nicely, and again, I just like the way it fits and the size it's at. Another big pro for me is the dial is just beautifully done. The finishing, the brushing, the applied indices, it is just executed to a standard I believe is much higher than you would expect at this price point, and it's almost surprising. It has a beautiful depth of color and it just does look really premium. My last pro for this watch, and I don't think I've said this about any watch I've ever reviewed, is that I really love the strap that it comes on. This is one of the very few cases where the quote-unquote OEM manufacturer went with a very nice strap. Of course, it's not quote-unquote made by them. They did partner with Deluxe to make this strap for it, but it pairs with the color beautifully. The accent stitching is very nice. It just pairs awesomely, and you're getting basically an $80, $90 strap on a $400 watch, which is kind of rare to see. Usually you're stuck with a cheapy strap, which you're kind of gonna have to replace anyway. Whereas in this case, it's definitely a strap where you can just use it for the rest of the life of the watch and it is gonna be perfectly suited to it. So moving on to cons, and one of the bigger cons for me is I do think that the shape would feel a little bit more refined if it was thinner, or if they made kind of things to make it appear thinner. If they did a little bit of tricks with the case to make the mid case feel less blocky, if they went for maybe an acrylic crystal instead of sapphires to make the dial feel a little bit closer to the eye view, a little closer to the top of the wrist rather than the bottom of it. There are probably small little things they could have tweaked here and there, but there's give and takes, right? Obviously we have sapphire crystal here, which is, you know, better for scratch resistance. I'm sure construction wise the case is just easier to make without doing a bunch of cuts and juts and random little things to it, because I don't doubt the dial is probably one of the more expensive parts of this watch to make. So you kind of have to pick your battles. As a note to kind of add on to that, I think maybe the perfect form of this watch is not a chronograph. If they can do even a very super slim quartz movement or a manuine movement, it would really just make this watch the perfect form of what it wants to be. It wants to be dressy, it wants to be clean, it wants to be simple. And if you take the registers off there, if you just make this a three-hand watch, if you add that beautiful brushing, that beautiful brigade numerals, and give that really well done dial more real estate to shine, you really couldn't go wrong. My only other slight little con with the watch is I would say the price point's a little high for a quartz watch that we would typically see at this price point. Again, you're doing a comparable Dan Henry around $270, maybe $280, but I understand where some of that price is coming from. If I put this side by side with the Dan Henry, most of this watch feels better quality. The case on Dan Henry maybe here or there just maybe fits better, but that can be something that can be fixed in future iterations with a Haim. I do think the add-ons of this watch do make it more expensive, but also kind of worthwhile. Again, you're getting an $80 value with the strap, and it's a perfect, amazing strap, whereas the Dan Henry straps, kind of terrible. You also do get the quote-unquote watch box that it comes in as a 2-slot travel case, which is very beautifully finished. I would easily pay probably $40, $50 for that. So you're getting about $130 of added-on value with those two things. So if we take that into account, it's not that much more than the Dan Henry, and you're getting what you pay for realistically. Final thoughts, and I was really pleasantly surprised by this watch. I ordered it to begin with just because I thought it looked interesting and I wanted to try out a new micro brand. But at the end of the day, I was very much blown away by how good the elements were executed here. A lot of the times I don't think applied numerals get done correctly. I don't think that dials get done in a dynamic enough way. They're usually flat, they're usually one color, they're usually not enough life to keep you interested, especially at these lower price points. They ended up creating something that feels much more than just the sum of its parts, something that really feels high quality, something that really can stack up to watches that are multiples of its price. For example, earlier I was comparing the Haim, at least personally, not in the video unfortunately, to this Omega Schumacher that I have, and to me, there's a lot of things that would make me want to go for the Haim over this. The only way that the Omega really wins, in my opinion, is the case shape is awesome. So is the case shape worth that extra basically $2,000? Not really. Now, to be fair, this is a actual mechanical chronograph, so that's where some of the cost is coming in as well. But saying all things were equal, if this was a quartz watch, and let's say it was even $1,000 cheaper, that case shape's not worth that much. If the case shape on the Haim was a little bit more refined, a little bit thinner, a little bit more thought out in terms of extra finishings, or just a little bit more rounded edges, or just something that makes it feel slightly more premium from where it is now, because it feels like a very good version of the basic case. I know they've done things to try to make it feel a little bit more unique, but you could definitely go an extra step with it. If they took those extra steps, this would be a mind-blowing watch for the price point and an incredible value. I don't think there's a lot of brands doing something like this. I think the most direct equivalent is maybe something like Studio Underdog. And even then, the dial on this is better, and the case shape is close. I would say the Studio Underdog wears better, but overall I like the design of this case better. So there isn't really a one-to-one with this watch. I do think they're doing a really nice thing, and I'm excited to see what they do in the future. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Thank you as always for watching the video. Let me know down below if you want me to review anything else, or if there's any specific watches you want to see. Let me know if you get this watch or what you think about this watch. And yeah, hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you in another one.